Hey everyone, welcome back to the All the Things podcast. This is Lindsay Maestas, and I am here on my own today. Lenya couldn't make it, but I am with our guest, Trevor Tyson. Hey, Trevor.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Sure. So, you guys, Trevor is the founder of Fear is a Liar Co., which is super cool merch and clothes and all the things, just its own brand within itself. And then he's the host of Trevor Talks Podcast. So, tell me a little bit, Trevor, about how you got started in this realm. I know that our topic today is anxiety, and I'm really excited to dig into it. But how did you get into the podcasting world and into the clothing world?
So, the most recent one would be the podcast, and it kind of happened as a result of the pandemic. I had
Okay.
always wanted to turn the Trevor Talks brand from like the live event spectrum into something a little more consistent and grounded for people to, follow along the journey with and be able
Mhm.
to put out content. So, I was on tour this year, and I think it was March 12th or the 13th. No, it was sometime in March. The whole tour got canceled, so I flew home and I was like, okay, this is a perfect time to start something new and fresh. And I feel like people need that inspirational content right now. So it kind of just happened as a result of the pandemic. So when people are like, nothing good came out of the pandemic, like,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people got to work on some passion projects. So we can
I
look on the bright side
fully,
there.
yes, I so agree with that. I've spoken with that a little bit with Lenya actually. I feel like I've seen an influx of people who are beginning to do what they love because they've had time to actually sit and think about those things and to be home and consider, where do I want my life to go? And I think it's so honorable that people have used such a tremendously tragically difficult time to make good out of it. And I feel like that's just God's purpose and God's work. So I really love that you did that and you followed that call in obedience as well.
Yeah, it's like I I love touring and everything, but there's something about having that consistent thing that you can do and have guests on come share their stories. Because most of what my podcast is interviews. I want to hear everyone's story. I want to point
Mm.
it back to Jesus. I want to hear what crap they've gone through to get
Yeah.
where they are now. And everything has a purpose to it that happens in life.
Mm.
Nobody's story is the same. Nobody's passions are the same. They could be similar. Even if you're in the same niche, everybody has a different story. And
Mhm.
that's kind of the same thing with a clothing brand. When I was, I would say 17 years old, I started struggling with anxiety, and I had all these big plans to go move to Minneapolis and intern with a really cool organization called Pulse and do all of these fun things. But I was doing a show in Birmingham, Alabama, and I had a panic attack and I didn't know what
Mm.
was going on. I asked the EMT if they had ibuprofen or something because I was 17. I wasn't carrying it around like I
Yeah.
do now. And like, I just didn't know what was going on. And they're like, you might be having anxiety. And I'm like, no, like, I'm not crazy. So I'm walking around the parking lot outside of Church of the Highlands in Birmingham and like trying to throw up, heaving, going to different
Mhm.
bathrooms, huge church. So like just trying to find isolated places to try to make myself sick. And it
Yeah.
just wasn't happening. So it was a panic attack. And the next day I was supposed to speak at Shorter University here in Georgia. So I was going to be driving back, and I canceled that event day of. They were very gracious. I was like, hey, I'm sick, can't make it, kind of the blah thing, just getting out
Mhm.
of it. And they're like, oh, we can get somebody like on retainer. It's fine. So I came back home and I stayed out of school for a week because I was a senior in high school at the time. And I wouldn't get out of bed. It was a mental breakdown for
Mhm.
what I know now. And I probably should have been institutionalized in that season, but there's a lot of what ifs. So, like, I wouldn't come out of my room, wouldn't get out of the bed.
How long
Um,
did that last?
I would say a week. Like, I
Wow.
was barely eating, and I'm already so thin. Like, I was always picked on in middle school and high school for being so skinny anyway. So, like, me not eating, it was just a very unhealthy time.
Right.
And I finally got back up and went to school. And before this panic attack, I was able to speak in front of 20,000 people and be
Mm.
excited. And I, I was having panic attacks for um, doing a project in front of the class in my literature class. Like it just didn't make sense. And it was
So
a whole
off.
new thing.
Yeah. Like out
Yeah.
of your character. Completely
Yeah.
opposite. Yeah.
And I was usually like the one hosting the pep rallies and all
Hmm.
this other stuff, class president. And when it came time to give my, what do you call those speeches you give at graduation? Not a commencement. I don't know what it is, but I was having anxiety about that. They're like, no drinks on the football field because it's turf. And I was like, I'm not going down there without some chamomile tea. Like I
Mm-hmm.
needed, it was like you find that one thing that makes you feel a little bit comfortable. And
Yeah.
it's like, that's what I was going to take. But needless to say, after that, I went on like one more event, the last hoorah, to New Hampshire and did Soul Fest. And after that, on the way back, I was like, all right, I'm done with ministry. I'm done with speaking. I'm done with everything I had planned. I'm going to find a good job and live the American dream, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
But I was depressed. I was anxious. Ended up getting a job with AT&T, became the top sales rep in our company, and was sent to Cancun, was making a lot of money, bought a house, like all that at 19 years old. But with all that being said, it may sound like, ooh, like there's somebody out there like, I wish I could have bought a house at 19. It's like, yes, it was a blessing, but but I was so depressed, and I was obsessed with my job. All I did was work, and I hated my life. So all of that to say, like, the American dream's not going to satisfy you. Money's not going to satisfy you. And I wasn't like rolling in dough or anything, but
Right.
for that age, I was doing really well
Well, and it's
from the
the
outside. Yeah.
appearance. Yeah. It's the
Yeah. From the
appearance of
outside.
success. And I mean, it is success, but it comes at a cost and at a price. What would you say if there was anything, I'm just curious, that triggered the onset of that? Was there something specific that happened, or was it just very, very random for you in that moment with the church?
I feel like it was very random because I was doing everything as usual. I wasn't speaking at that event that night. I was just there promoting an
Mhm.
event. And it just happened. Like
Yeah.
I think I remember I didn't eat dinner that day or lunch because it was just so busy. So like I almost feel like it had something to do with like hunger and my body just going into that panic fight or flight mode, and I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know the
Mhm.
proper ways to address it. I was breathing heavy. Like it turned into a terrible situation for me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's anything that I could have done different because I just wasn't educated at the time. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what pours into what I do now is like, oh, you're struggling with this. I'm not a professional, but here's some things that help me. And just trying to help the church and even people outside the church become
Yeah.
educated on mental health.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that, Trevor. I started my ministry about 4 years ago because of postpartum anxiety. So I can relate. It all stemmed from kind of not feeling like I had other moms to find in at that time 4 years ago. As of compared to now, I feel like now there's so much more conversation about these things, which I'm so thankful for. But I launched into that because I wanted to talk about the hard stuff. And my first blog post was basically saying I have hated being a mom for the past 9 months because I feel like I can't even touch my kid without having an anxiety attack, and kind of digging into that. And so this conversation is important, but I love that you also talked about the food, because I think physiologically, when we deprive ourselves of sleep or of food, it is incredible how much it affects our mental health. Um, and that's something I've learned over time. Like when I'm starting to feel really anxious, I need sleep most of the time. And I need to make sure I'm taking care of my body as well. So that's one thing that helped me. But I'm curious for you, I I believe that anxiety is still sometimes stigmatized by people who don't understand it, who don't go through it. We talk all the time, Lenny and I, about the church and how it's so important that the church doesn't say, pray it away, wish it away. It's not going to just go away. It is something that is a mental health issue. So, what are some things during that time that helped you? And what are some things that hurt you so that our listeners can help those who may be struggling that they know?
Well, I'll start with what hurt because I feel like it's important to talk about the things that were damaging to me in that season. And isolating myself would probably be the biggest one because I thrive on community. I'm an
Me too.
extrovert. I just love being around people, but I would find myself driving to church, getting to the parking lot, having a panic attack, driving right back home, like just not getting out of the car.
Mm.
So just very off things that if you have a friend or maybe it's you that's struggling with this, like there's very clear signs that are easy to overlook, and it's changes in behavior that are going to be the most clear signs for you. So even when I would get out and go into gatherings and stuff, I remember I was at a movie pre-screening for, I think it was Little Women,
Mm-hmm.
and which is so random. Uh,
I like that you remember it though.
yeah, it's there were so many like influencers and like famous faith-based people there, and I just felt like I don't belong here. So
Mm.
I was there with my friends Nick and Chelsea, and I literally was walking out to go home. I drove all the way to Atlanta for this event, and I was walking out, and Nick was walking in from his car. Whoa, 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 where are you going? And Nick was living with me at the time, so he didn't drag me back in, but was just like, let's go back in. Like,
Yeah.
and I would find like 2 or 3 people to click around, and I'm glad I stayed. It was definitely hard, and I know for a fact when I'm struggling with anxiety, I have to fight through it, or I'm gonna feel worse eventually. So like
Mm-hmm.
I remember another time with Nick and Chelsea again. I met them in Atlanta for dinner one night, and I was so anxious. Like I literally went to the bathroom, tried to splash cold water on my face. It wasn't working, so I gave them my debit card and was like, "I got to get out of here." Didn't give any
Mm-hmm.
explanation. They could tell that I was having a panic attack, but in my brain it didn't click to like, "Oh, I should probably give them an explanation." I was like, "Nah, I'm gonna go home," and I drove like 95 miles an hour the whole way home just because I was having like a manic episode,
Mm-hmm.
and that's dangerous. So I think that's the turning point where I was like, okay, and we'll get into the things that helped me now. And that moment, I was like, I need to go to therapy. I need to go see a psychiatrist. I need to figure this out because I can't let this take over my life. Because if
Right.
I don't make a change now, who's to say I won't kill myself?
Mm-hmm.
It comes down to, are you willing to face that hard reality of like, okay, if I stay on this destructive path, how do I know that I'm not going to die by my own hands?
Right.
And I would never consider myself as someone who's had the gun in their hand ready to do it. But there's definitely been times where I'm like, I bet everybody would be better off without me here because I'm just becoming a burden.
That seems
So,
like the greatest lie, the most common lie that people believe with suicide is I would be less of a burden if I were gone. It's
yeah,
so interesting how that it's interesting you say that because the people I know who struggle with suicide, those are the exact words that they say. And that is the lie that the enemy feeds into us so much. And I just want our listeners to acknowledge if you hear those words, that it couldn't be more of a lie when you consider the futures of your family and the futures of your loved ones and what they would have to go through. There is no thing that would be less of a burden, they're more of a burden than losing you. So
yeah.
just to clarify that, but yeah, keep
And
going.
I just had a friend pass, not by suicide.
Mm.
She had a heart condition, but she just married one of my closest friends
Oh,
earlier this
I'm
year, 21
sorry.
years old. She was so close to graduating from UGA after she died. They honorarily gave her diploma. Like all she
Mm.
had was some like in-person teaching stuff to do.
Yeah.
And I can say like I said, she didn't die by suicide. She had a very terrible heart condition, but seeing the effect that an unexpected death has on a family,
Yeah.
I could not imagine what it would have been like if we knew that she didn't want to be here, because she
Mm-hmm.
did. She loved life. She loved people. She was an impact on thousands, and it was crazy amazing to see like what fruits that God allowed her to have in those 21 years of loving life. So to just think about someone that dies by their own hand, like a lot of times it's a mental condition that like they weren't in the right state of mind. Sometimes they
Mm-hmm.
are in the right state of mind. A friend of mine, Jared, passed by suicide last year. I don't think he was in the right state of mind. I think he
Mm-hmm.
was drowning in depression, and it just kind of took over, kind of like cancer does. But
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, suicide doesn't get talked about as much, especially the fact that more people have died by suicide during this pandemic than COVID-19 itself.
Yeah.
Says something, not only in China, not only in the United States, globally, more people have died by suicide during the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic than COVID-19 itself. So while all these
Mm-hmm.
hospital beds are full of people that are dying by COVID, and I'm not saying it's not a huge deal because it is, But just think of all the people that are in their beds dying of another disease at home because they can't go to work, provide for their families, and be around people. They need that
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
So it's just a very troubling time. And I think that's why we're seeing an influx in suicides, obviously.
Mhm.
But a huge lie that people believe is not only that like people would be better off without me, it's that this is going to solve my problem when in fact it is the problem.
Mhm.
Suicide's the problem. So when you die, it's not only hurting those around you, it's adding your problems to their plate too.
Mhm.
So it may seem too big to fix right now, but that's a small issue compared to what is going to be placed on your loved ones. And I'm not saying that to make anyone feel bad for having suicidal thoughts. I just want to open that dialogue that, hey, have you considered your mom, your dad, even if you're not getting along right now and you hate their guts? Just imagine someone that you love. You may not think you love them right now, but you will, I promise you,
Mhm.
after they're gone, realize that you love them. Just imagine, just gone, no note, no nothing, just gone with the wind. Nothing you could have done because you didn't know,
Yeah.
but that's a whole other discussion. Like,
Yeah.
be vulnerable.
Yeah. That's so good. And I do feel like that is the conversation that needs to be had even more. And I think it's a discussion, but not diminishing COVID, as you said. We're not diminishing the gravity and the weight of this pandemic, but we are in a state with the highest suicide rate in the US. We have one of the highest child suicide rates as well. We just recently lost a 12-year-old boy to suicide in the thick of the pandemic because he was lonely, was his reason. So I love this discussion. And I just want to encourage our listeners as well. If you know anyone struggling, send this over because there's something about knowing that someone else feels the way that you feel and that Trevor has gone through this. I have faced it in a different way, but that you aren't alone and that there is another side to it. Not that you're going to fully be delivered from it necessarily, but that you will have healing and you will experience healing. And you had mentioned therapy and counseling. And I am just the greatest advocate of counseling as a fire preventative before the house burns down. So, how did therapy help you? What did it do to walk you through the process of healing through anxiety?
Yeah, so I went through what is called EDMR therapy, and it was a game changer for me. I went to a local counselor here in Monroe, Georgia, called Hope Springs, and my therapist there, Sherry, it was just phenomenal. Like, you revisit these situations where there's trauma in your life, and the crazy thing is, like, I've never been in war or anything, and for some reason, like, PTSD is wrapped up in like, oh, you only get that if you go to war. No, there was
Mhm.
trauma that I had to work through. And all of these things added up, and from neglection and feeling alone. And I had a pretty normal childhood, but there were a lot of things that were said and done to me that weren't right. And
Mhm.
I just kind of put on the tough face and said, okay, I guess that's me. Like, I
Mhm.
was never the sports player. I was never the one that wants to be super active. Like, I was always an advocate at heart. I've always been a leader at heart. That's what God's put me on this earth to do. But when you're told you're not a leader for so long, you begin to believe it.
Yeah.
And that's where my breaking point was. And another thing is like toxic masculinity goes into it, like getting picked on because you're not the same as all the other guys. And like, I would never date because I had this, and this is me being super vulnerable. I don't even think I've shared this yet because it's very
Yeah.
recent that I've learned it. Um, I wouldn't date because I was told, like, I was put down so much that I began to believe that, oh, I could never be a husband because I can't be a guardian. I'm not strong enough.
Mm.
What a woman is going to want to spend her life with someone that can't protect her, because I was always told you're a weakling, you're a wimp, like this,
Mm.
that, the other, you're too skinny, you're not bulky enough. Like, I've won 2 national championships for powerlifting. Like, I've got some core
Mm.
strength. It doesn't
Mhm.
show, but that's the power of your words, right? The diminishing of someone's livelihood is so effective. And I love comedy. I love watching roasts. Those are like just super fun for me.
Mhm.
But outside of that setting, people need to shut up. Like,
Well, I mean,
yeah,
when it's not
yeah,
intentionally
yeah,
playful, and
yeah.
when it's unkind, I mean, and I think any single person listening can relate in one way that they've been bullied growing up. But I do love that you bring that up, the toxic masculinity, because one, I feel like this year has brought that to light in a lot of ways. There's been a lot of conversation. Social media has plenty of its own downfalls, but there are things that where awareness really comes into play. And I'm thankful for those conversations. And I think that the lies that you hear as you're growing up play such a large role in the insecurities, obviously, that we face as we get older, but also um, how much it plays into the way that we interact with other people and the way that we interact with ourselves. Just like you're saying, you missed out potentially, who knows God, what God had in store for you, but on dating or on those things at that time because of insecurities, lies
Mhm.
being fed into you. So what would your words of encouragement be to listeners who still live in those insecurities, who still live in those anxieties, who have been a victim of toxic masculinity, whether female or male, because it plays into both? How would you encourage our society, I guess, to be better and to fight against those lies?
I would say the biggest thing for me was when I stopped focusing on horizontal and started focusing on the vertical relationship, like let God
Good.
pour into me and not the words of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also say, like, obviously with me not dating in high school, going to homecoming or prom or anything like that, which I don't regret because I was out touring and living what I wanted to like feel called to do essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it set me up for like being in my 20s and being like, oh, got to learn how to do that. Never did that. So it comes down to like one thing that I struggle with in particular is the first girl I ever dated and still the only one I've made official with. She I had to reschedule like the first date like 3 times because I
Mm-hmm.
kept having panic attacks. So find somebody that understands you. She was in school to be a nutritionist, a dietitian. She understood anxiety. Like she was so gracious, and it's just phenomenal how much patience she had. Find someone that is willing to walk with you through this process, and
Yeah.
don't feel obligated to give anything right off the bat. Like if you feel uncomfortable talking about anxiety, put yourself out there and be like, hey, I know this probably isn't the best thing to talk about right off the bat or may seem unattractive, but I want to be vulnerable with you. I struggle
Mm-hmm.
with anxiety. So here are some things that might come up, and I'm sorry ahead of time, kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. But just trust God and trust in the person he's created you to be. For so long, was beating myself up because I thought my physical appearance was terrible. I thought everything about me I would just beat up all the time, and it was so unhealthy. So stop listening to the voices in your head, stop listening
Yeah.
to the people around you, and start listening to God. Are you having those one-on-one conversations with him? Are you praying? Are you getting your daily bread? Because
Mm-hmm.
just like I wasn't eating, if you're not getting your daily bread, you are literally starving yourself of the word of life.
Yeah.
You're not going to feel refreshed. Like when I go without scripture, I feel more depressed. I feel more anxious. I feel more exhausted. And why is that? When you don't eat food, your body gets weak. When you're not getting your daily bread, how are you going to live on that?
Mm-hmm.
So spend that time with God and let him lead you the way that he wants you to go, but also don't walk through it alone. Find somebody that'll walk through it with you. I've got a group of like 4 dudes that I'm just really honest with and walk through this with. And none of us look the same. To put them an example, one of them, my best friend, Ray, hardcore Republican, like always wearing the Trump 2020 hat, like bigger dude, and we are the best of friends because
Mm-hmm.
he gets me, I get him. We love each other. You may see him at an event. He likes to say he's my security guard. I'd take it. Like I'm not Justin Bieber or anything, but I like having somebody with me. And then there's just so many people that I'm able to walk with, whether they struggle with anxiety or not on a daily basis. They know how to handle me. And you
Mm-hmm.
need that person in your life, whether it's your mom, dad, best friend, brother, sister, cousin, grandparents, or just some random person you meet online. Um, God can provide in so many different ways. You just have to trust him and chase that.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you mentioned the abiding in the word, because I think for me, it's been really helpful in moments when I feel the need to rely upon myself and my own strength, which I do a lot. I'm like very achiever oriented. And so I can get lost in the go, go, go and the accomplishments and
Same.
the pride of it all, that comes with it. And as soon as I give myself the reminder, I guess, or the Holy Spirit prompts me to get back into the word and to abide, then all of the gross, all of the empty pursuits, the idolatry begins to wither away because you have that accountability from the Lord. And then, as you're mentioning, you have that accountability from your friends who are guiding and directing and holding you, and also encouraging and admonishing you in the moments when you're weak and when you're struggling. So that abiding in the word and abiding in those relationships are so, so crucial, which ties back to why 2020 has been so challenging, because it's been really hard to abide in those relationships. But fellowship is a calling. It is a hard and high and holy calling that is so, so necessary in our lives. And I think that it helps to dispel the fear of doing things alone and of feeling like you're alone. Like my husband and I, since we've been married, always ensure that we have married couples around to kind of just banter and talk through things, because it reminds you, all right, we're not the only ones who go through this. Like there are so many other people who face these things, and just having that insight with somebody who may not fully understand you, but they love you and they're willing to walk through it is so, so crucial. So, in touching on fear, your clothing brand Fear is a Liar Co., we tend to fear the unknown. We tend to fear what intimidates us or what's bigger than us. We tend to fear because of comparison and feeling like we're never going to reach that standard that we have set. But one of the most common commands in scripture is do not fear, or fear not. So how do you believe that fear plays into anxiety, and how does faith fight that fear?
Yeah, so fear of itself is you're scared of something, and what scares you makes you anxious. So they work hand in hand together, but there's also different cases of anxiety that aren't fear triggered.
Mhm.
But when it comes down to it, the things that scare me the most are not fitting expectations or not meeting goals or not being able to pursue my calling, but all of that was put on hold because of anxiety and fear, right?
Yeah.
So there was something that I was fearing. There were things that I was doing that were diminishing to my life. And those all played hand in hand. But to answer your question, fear itself is you fearing the unknown.
Mhm.
You're not sure what's coming. When NFL players go out to play a football game, they don't know if they're going to walk out with a concussion. I'd have an anxiety attack every time I ran out of the like it's not
Same.
going to work. Like this
Yeah.
big dude's running at me. It's not going to work. But I bring up the NFL and like football and even wrestling and all those because it's a physical challenge. Just think of the endurance you have to have and the practice that goes into it. So
Mhm.
how can you combat fear? How can you combat the fear that you struggle with daily, whether it's anxiety, depression, financial distress, the things that cause you fear? How can you combat that with faith? Prayer, trust that God has something better for you. And those might sound like Sunday school answers, but there's literally nothing else anybody can tell you other than here's some tips and tricks that you can overcome panic. And yes, we could talk about breathing exercises and
Mhm.
stretching and yoga and working out, eating healthy, but when it comes
Medicine.
down to it, yeah, medicine for sure.
Mhm.
I take anxiety medicine and
Yeah.
it's helped me live a normal life.
Right.
Thank God for medicine.
Yes.
And if anybody
Amen.
out there still thinks that medicine is against the Bible, and next time you get a headache and go for that ibuprofen, think of if you were having terrible anxiety and you wanted to get rid of it, what would you do? You'd find that.
Mhm. Yeah.
So medicine can help heal you. Just personal belief there.
Yeah. Agreed.
And back to fear and faith, like if you're not willing to put in the work, if you're not going to go to practice, if you're not going to go and learn your craft more, you're going to lose your games, you're going to lose your
Mhm.
matches. So if you're not practicing, like overcoming this fear, doing the breathing techniques, praying, journaling, going to therapy, taking medicine, all of these things that you need to hit on to win your game, you're not going to win if you're not preparing for it.
Yeah.
Just like if you stay out of work for 9 years and decide to go back, you're going to be a little rusty. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
be a little bad for your employer and
Yeah.
yourself. You may not work very long if
Yeah.
it's a high school profession, but you have to take care of yourself. You
Mm-hmm.
have to make time to take care of yourself. You have to make sure that your faith is on top at all times. If you have a relationship that's dragging you down, whether it's a friend or a spouse, a girlfriend, boyfriend, and it's not healthy for you, cut it out. You should be
Yeah.
able.
One thing that has really helped me just in a practical sense, uh, aside from obviously like prayer and reading and everything, because that just keeps my mind and my heart grounded, but is just kind of unloading my brain in those moments when I feel that way. And because I think especially as women, we tend to have like a million computer windows open at a time and you don't really close any of them out. They're always going. And sometimes just emptying out everything that is on your heart and on your mind and writing all of it down to get to a point where you realize, okay, this is priority A, priority B, priority C. The rest of these things are just causing worry. And the Bible says, do not be anxious about in anything but in prayer and supplication. Make your requests known to God. And then the peace of God will be with you because you're replacing that anxiety with the peace of Christ that surpasses all understanding. So getting those thoughts out and actually seeing them written on paper. And then what has really transformed things for me is putting the lies down that I'm believing and writing them out so that they're tangibly in front of my face, and then putting the truth next to it that separates it. So in the moments when I'm starting to believe those lies, I can absolutely immediately counteract it with truth that I know to be God's word and to be real and heart changing and life changing. And not that that's a fix all. Like Trevor said, it is a medicine. I take anxiety medication as well. It's medicine. It's talking, confessing, opening up about those things and not being ashamed of what you're facing, because our openness brings freedom to other people,
Yeah.
just like with what you're talking about. So, well, thank you so much, Trevor. I really appreciate your time and honesty and openness. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you on social media and Fear is a Liar?
Yeah, so Fear is a Liar is at fearisaliar.co. That's .co. And then on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, if you just search at Trevor Talks, you'll be able to find me there. But if you're listening to this and you're struggling with anxiety or depression, suicidal thoughts, just remember that you're stronger than your symptoms. Those
Yeah.
symptoms are just that. They're a symptom of something. Try to figure out the root of the cause of what you're going through and start addressing it. Believe in yourself and never give up. Your life
Yeah.
matters.
Amen. Awesome. Well, thanks, Trevor. Thanks so much for coming on. And to all of our listeners, we will talk to you guys next Tuesday. Bye.